All batteries report full readiness. That's the line from the radio transcript. April 13th, 1986, 22:17 hours, Libyan Air Defense Command Net. The controller sounds calm, professional. The kind of calm that comes from confidence, not ignorance. Tripoli had been preparing for an American strike since the Gulf of Sidra incident in March. That's when Libyan patrol boats got shredded by A-6 intruders, and the U.S. Navy decided the entire Gulf was international waters, regardless of what Gaddafi's maps said. The humiliation stung. But it also bought time, 5 weeks to get ready for the inevitable retaliation. The Libyans used that time. Soviet advisors helped position SA-5 Gammon batteries around likely targets. Long-range missiles designed to kill bombers at altitude. They added SA-3 Goa systems for medium-altitude coverage, SA-6 Gainful for low-level threats, and packed the approaches with ZSU-23-4 Shilka mobile guns. Overlapping sectors, redundant coverage. The doctrine called it layered defense. Radar sites went active in shifts, making it harder to map the full network. Dummy positions drew attention. Real launchers stayed cold until needed. Gaddafi's military spent Soviet money on a system that looked credible on paper. Missiles that had killed Israeli jets over the Bekaa Valley, guns that shredded helicopters in Afghanistan, radars that could track low-flying targets through ground clutter. The confidence wasn't completely unfounded. Libya operated more than 200 SAM launchers by April 1986. That's more missiles than Iraq had during the entire first week of Desert Storm. The problem wasn't quantity. American reconnaissance satellites watched the preparations. SR-71 flights mapped radar emissions from international airspace. The intelligence summary that reached Norfolk showed exactly what the Libyans wanted someone to see: a dense, integrated network that would make any strike costly. The analysts noted it, filed it, passed it to mission planners. What the Libyans didn't know: American mission planners weren't impressed by what impressed Soviet doctrine writers. Overlapping radar coverage matters if the enemy flies where your radars look. Missiles work when your guidance systems can track the target. Guns hit things when you can see them long enough to aim. The radio transcript from April 13th continues for another 40 minutes. Status checks, confirmation that crews were at posts, discussion of alert levels. The controller mentions weather. Clear night, good visibility, moonrise at 23:14 hours. Conditions that favor visual tracking. Nobody on that net mentioned terrain following radar. Nobody discussed what happens when the threat comes in below 200 meters. The gaps in the Soviet doctrine manual didn't make it into Libyan training. At 23:50 hours on April 13th, all batteries reported full readiness again. The controller logged it. 4 minutes later, the radio net went chaotic. The assessment document exists in Libya's military archives. Probably. The version that reached Western intelligence came through a defector in 1988, and it's incomplete. Pages 7 through 11 are missing, the signature is redacted, and someone removed the distribution list. But what remains shows how Soviet advisors viewed the defensive network. The word that appears most often is echeloned. Echeloned. It's the foundation of Soviet air defense doctrine. Layers of overlapping systems that force attackers through multiple engagement zones. High-altitude missiles push aircraft down. Medium-altitude systems catch anything that descends. Low-altitude guns and short-range missiles handle what gets through. Nothing survives all three layers. The linguistic choice matters. Echeloned implies inevitability, mathematical certainty. It's not layered defense, which suggests something the enemy might navigate around. It's staged, sequential, unavoidable. The doctrine assumes attackers will conform to the system, fly predictable routes, maintain survivable altitudes, present themselves to each defensive belt in sequence. The April 11th assessment lists specific numbers. Tripoli approaches were covered by 6 SA-5 sites, providing high-altitude engagement from 80 kilometers out. Closer in, 9 SA-3 batteries created a medium-altitude belt from 30 kilometers. Inside that, 17 SA-6 launchers and 42 Shilka guns protected the final approaches. The math looked overwhelming. Soviet advisors walked Libyan commanders through engagement sequences. SA-5 missiles would force American aircraft below 10,000 meters. SA-3 systems would engage anything above 3,000. SA-6 batteries would target threats between 500 and 3,000 meters. Shilkas would shred anything that descended into visual range. The doctrine assumed attackers would appear on radar with enough warning for coordinated response. It assumed missiles would guide properly against maneuvering targets. It assumed radar operators could distinguish aircraft from ground clutter at low altitude. It assumed the Americans would play by Soviet rules. Gaddafi's command bunker received the assessment on April 12th. The conclusion stated the defensive network could inflict unacceptable losses on any strike package. That phrase appears twice in the summary paragraph. Whoever wrote it believed it. What's missing from the assessment? Any mention of terrain masking flight profiles. Any discussion of precision-guided weapons released from low altitude. Any analysis of American electronic warfare capabilities against Soviet export radar systems. The gaps aren't oversights. Soviet doctrine in 1986 didn't seriously consider attackers who would fly 500 feet above the Mediterranean for 3 hours, navigate by terrain following radar, and pop up only for weapon release. The document includes a meteorological note. Night operations would be significantly degraded by darkness limiting visual acquisition. Soviet systems of that era depended heavily on optical tracking for final engagement. The assessment recommended maintaining heightened alert during daylight hours. The Americans struck at night. One more detail from the defectors' package: the distribution list for the assessment, before redaction, reportedly included 17 names: Soviet advisors, Libyan Air Defense Command, Intelligence Directorate. After April 15, 1986, a revised assessment went out. The defector never saw it. He thinks 6 people received that version. Nobody's confirmed who they were. 6 F-111Fs left RAF Lakenheath at 17:36 hours on April 14th. That's the official time. The mission briefing happened 8 hours earlier, before sunrise, in a room that still smelled like floor wax and bad coffee. Crew assignments had been set for 3 days. Pilots and weapons systems officers who'd trained together, flown together, knew each other's timing under stress. The pairings weren't random. Mission planners matched crews to targets based on weapons delivery profiles and known defenses. Karma, Maine, the Sidi Bilal naval base, went to the crew with the most PAVTAC experience. The Bab al-Azizia barracks compound went to the team that could thread a GBU-10 through a 30-foot window. PAVTAC pods changed everything about precision strikes: infrared targeting system, laser designator, stabilized optics that could track targets while the aircraft maneuvered. The pod let crews identify, designate, and guide weapons from standoff range. Soviet doctrine didn't account for it because Soviet export customers didn't have it. The briefing covered what they knew about Libyan defenses. SA-5 coverage concentrated around Tripoli proper. SA-3 and SA-6 batteries positioned to protect key facilities. Shilka concentrations near military bases. The intelligence summary showed impressive numbers, enough missiles to matter if you flew where they expected. The flight profile bypassed expectations. Overwater approach at 500 feet, terrain following radar, keeping them below Libyan search radar horizons. No formations. Aircraft spaced to reduce radar cross-section, maintain flexibility, complicate targeting even if someone got lucky with detection. Radio silence from takeoff to target area. Navigation depended on inertial systems cross-checked against known landmarks. The Mediterranean coastline at night, specific terrain features, pre-programmed waypoints that kept them away from known radar sites. Crews couldn't talk to each other, couldn't confirm positions. Either your navigation was accurate or you missed the target window. Timing mattered more than coordination. Each crew had a specific second to be over their target, not minute, second. The attack compressed into 12 minutes because that's how long it took before Libyan defenses could coordinate effective response. First bombs had to hit before Air Defense Command understood what was happening. They briefed weather. Clear night, Good visibility, calm winds. That favored both sides, easier for attackers to navigate visually, easier for defenders to spot aircraft once they popped up for weapon release. The F-111 crews accepted it. You don't get to pick conditions. What they didn't brief: contingencies for aircraft losses, rescue procedures, what happens if someone gets shot down over Tripoli. The mission profile was one way in, one way out. No loitering, no combat air patrol overhead, no rescue assets within 500 miles. You made your pass, released weapons, got out. Lakenheath to Tripoli is 1,300 nautical miles. At 500 feet over the ocean, fighting turbulence, maintaining radio silence, flying manual terrain, following profiles for 6 hours. The crews understood what that meant for fatigue, for concentration, for making split-second decisions over the target. They walked out of the briefing room at 9:20 hours. 8 hours later, engines started. The first F-111 taxied at 17:28. The flight profile wasn't subtle once you understood what it accomplished. 500 feet over the Mediterranean sounds low until you're actually there. Wave tops occasionally visible in moonlight. Radar altimeter counting feet, not thousands of feet. Turbulence from surface wind that makes the aircraft buck and shudder for 6 straight hours. Terrain following radar let crews maintain altitude without visual reference. The system painted obstacles ahead, commanded climb or descend to maintain clearance, kept the aircraft in a zone where Libyan search radars couldn't get clean returns. Ground clutter at that altitude swamps most radar systems. The F-111 signature blended into sea return, weather, the electromagnetic noise that fills low-altitude airspace. Radio silence meant exactly that. No position calls, no status checks, no confirmation that other aircraft were on profile. Each crew flew their mission alone, trusting that 5 other F-100s and 11s were doing the same thing somewhere in the darkness. Navigation errors meant missing the target window or arriving at the wrong second, both unacceptable. Inertial systems drifted. Crews cross-checked against known waypoints when they could identify them visually. What they could see on their scopes: ocean below, empty air ahead, occasional radar returns from ships that never saw them pass. What they couldn't see: Libyan air defense radars sweeping overhead, searching altitudes where attackers were supposed to fly, missing the actual threats by 3,000 feet. The approach route stayed over water until the last possible moment. International airspace until it wasn't. The Med doesn't care about political boundaries. It's flat, featureless, navigationally challenging when your primary reference is radar altimeter and clock. Crews felt the fatigue around hour 4. Hands tight on controls, eyes scanning instruments, constant small corrections to maintain profile. The aircraft wanted to climb. Every instinct said get altitude, get away from the surface, fly where there's margin for error. The mission required staying low. At some point, each crew picked up the Libyan coast on radar, terrain rising from sea level, distinctive features that matched pre-mission imagery. That's the confirmation. Navigation was accurate, timing was good, target area ahead. No celebration, just throttle adjustment, weapons system checks, final approach preparation. They couldn't see each other. 6 F-100s and 11s converging on Tripoli from slightly different approach vectors, seconds apart, none of them visible to the others. The coordination was mathematical: speed, distance, time. Each crew hit their marks, or the mission timing collapsed. PAVTAC pods went active close to target. Infrared sensors picked up heat signatures from buildings, vehicles, power systems. The weapons systems officers had studied the targets for days. They knew what each facility looked like on infrared, which buildings mattered, where to aim for maximum effect. Final approach meant climb. You can't deliver precision-guided weapons from 500 feet. The laser needs angle. The bomb needs time to guide. Each crew would pop up, acquire target, designate, release, get out. Seconds exposed. That's when Libyan defenses would finally see them. The first F-111 reached Karma, Maine at 23:54 hours. Karma, Maine was the Sidi Bilal Naval Base. Docks, storage facilities, small craft maintenance, naval commando barracks. The kind of target that matters more for what it represents than what it does. Gaddafi used the base for operations against shipping, training for the commandos who'd hit targets in Europe. The Americans wanted it gone. The F-111 crew had the coordinates locked before they climbed. Pavtak Pod tracked the target complex, infrared sensors painting buildings in shades of heat signature. The weapons systems officer identified the primary structure. 3-story barracks, distinct thermal pattern, exactly where intelligence said it would be. GBU-10 is a 2,000-pound bomb with laser guidance and stub wings. You don't drop it, you release it with forward velocity and let the seeker head find the laser spot. The bomb flies itself to target. The crew's job was putting the laser on the right building and keeping it there through release. Pop-up happened fast. Nose up, aircraft climbing through 2,000 feet. Enough altitude for weapons separation and guidance. The PAVTAC held lock. Laser designator painted the target. Weapons systems officer confirmed coordinates one last time. Master arm, hot. Release at 23:54, 17 hours. The bomb came off clean, seeker head tracking the laser energy reflecting from the barracks roof. The F-111 didn't wait to watch. Nose down immediately. Back to low altitude, full throttle toward the coast. Get in, get out. Seconds mattered. The GBU-10 needs 20 seconds to reach target from 2,000 feet. The guidance fins make continuous corrections, following that laser spot with precision Soviet planners didn't think Americans had. The bomb doesn't care about walls or roofs or what's inside. It goes where the laser points. Impact at 23:54:37. 2,000 pounds of high explosive entering through the roof, detonating inside the structure. The building didn't collapse immediately. It came apart in stages. Roof first, then walls blowing outward, then the fireball as secondary explosions from stored ammunition cooked off. 40 seconds from impact to complete structural failure. The explosion lit up every thermal sensor within 5 miles. It also lit up every Libyan radar screen that happened to be pointed at Sidi Bilal. That's when Air Defense Command understood something was happening. Not 6 hours ago when the F-111s took off from England. Not 3 hours ago when they crossed into Libyan airspace over the water. Right then, when the first bomb detonated. The crew that hit Karma, Maine was already 10 miles away. Back down at 500 feet, heading for international waters. Behind them, the Sidi Bilal complex burned. Ahead of them, 4 more F-111s were starting their attack runs on 4 separate targets. Libyan air defense had 11 minutes to figure out what was happening and coordinate response. The Americans had built the mission timeline around that number. Intelligence-assessed Libyan command and control couldn't effectively coordinate faster than 12 minutes from first detection to integrated defense. The F-111 crews were betting everything on that assessment being accurate. At 23:55 hours, SA-5 batteries around Tripoli went active. Radar energy flooded the sky, searching for targets at altitudes where American doctrine said bombers should be. The F-111s were flying 3,000 feet below that search pattern. 12 minutes covers a lot of Tripoli when you're hitting 5 separate targets simultaneously. The mission wasn't sequential, it was compressed. Each crew had their window measured in seconds, not minutes. The attack unfolded in overlapping pulses that made coordinated defense nearly impossible. Target 2 was the Jamahiriya barracks. Different crew, different approach vector, same weapon system. GBU-10 through the roof at 23:56 hours. Target 3, military intelligence headquarters at Bab al-Azizia, took hits at 23:58. The Benina airfield complex got hammered at 00:01 hours. Tripoli military airport storage facilities at 00:04. 5 targets, 6 aircraft. The math included 1 backup crew for the highest priority target. That's the aircraft that didn't come back. Hit Bab al-Azizia, took ground fire during egress, went down somewhere over the Mediterranean. The Navy never found wreckage. The crew names are on the wall at Lakenheath. Coordination without radio meant trusting mathematics. Speed times time equals distance. Each crew knew their target, their approach, their release time. They didn't know if other crews were on profile. They didn't know if someone had aborted. The mission design assumed everyone would execute, no backup plans, no adjustments for missing aircraft. The timing created cascading problems for Libyan defenses. Air Defense Command saw the first explosion at Sidi Bilal, started vectoring radars to that sector. Before they could coordinate missile batteries, Jamahiriya barracks exploded. Then, Bab al-Azizia. Each new detonation pulled attention, fragmented response, prevented the integrated defense their doctrine required. SA-5 batteries launched missiles. The crews did what training taught them: acquire target on radar, confirm track, fire. Missiles lifted off, guidance systems searching for threats at medium altitude. The F-111s they were supposed to kill were 5 miles away at 500 feet, already heading toward the coast. Some SA-6 batteries got closer. Shorter range, lower altitude capability, better chance against terrain-following aircraft. They fired at radar returns, at heat signatures from aircraft that had already climbed and descended, at ghosts and ground clutter and their own confusion. A few missiles actually tracked F-111s during egress. Crews saw launch warnings, deployed chaff, broke hard, got lucky. The Shilka guns never had a chance. Visual acquisition at night against fast-moving targets, brief exposure during weapon release, no time to track and lead. They fired anyway. Tracers arced through the sky over Tripoli, hitting nothing, wasting ammunition, confirming that someone was shooting back even if they weren't hitting anything. What made it work? The Americans weren't where Libyan doctrine said they'd be, weren't doing what Soviet training manuals said they'd do, weren't giving defenders the sequential engagement opportunities their system required. The echelon defense needed time. Time to detect, time to track, time to coordinate, time to engage. The F-111 crews didn't give them time. By 0006 hours, 5 targets were burning. 5 F-111s were over water, heading north. 1 F-111 was missing. Libyan air defense had fired 47 missiles and achieved 0 confirmed kills at target areas. The numbers don't lie. The attack lasted 11 minutes and 49 seconds from first bomb to last egress. Intelligence assessment said 12 minutes before effective coordination. The mission planners had 11 seconds of margin. That's the part that makes you think. Libyan radar operators saw some of it. Not all of it, not most of it, but enough to understand they'd missed something fundamental about how the attack worked. The SA-5 sites picked up aircraft during weapons release, brief radar returns as F-111s climbed for bombing runs, exposed themselves at altitude, then disappeared back into ground clutter. The operators did what they were trained to do. They locked what they could track, fired missiles at targets that guidance systems could see. The missiles went ballistic when aircraft descended below radar coverage. Soviet export systems in 1986 couldn't maintain lock on maneuvering targets at low altitude against land clutter. 3 SA-5 launches happened. The missiles climbed, searched for targets their radars said were there, found empty sky, self-destructed. Nobody knows exactly where they went. Debris recovery teams never found impact sites. The missiles just disappeared into the night over the Mediterranean. SA-3 batteries had better geometry for low-altitude engagement, medium-range systems designed for threats between 3,000 and 30,000 feet. They acquired targets. They fired. 6 missiles total from 4 different sites. 2 actually tracked F-111s during egress, close enough that crews got warning indicators, deployed countermeasures, broke toward the coast. The missiles lost track when aircraft descended to wave-top altitude where radar returns blended into sea clutter. The coverage gap wasn't a secret. Soviet doctrine acknowledged it. Search radars can't reliably track targets below 200 meters over land, lower over water. The solution was supposed to be guns, Shilkas, and manually aimed systems that didn't need radar, just visual acquisition and trained crews. That works in daylight. That works when targets stay in your field of view long enough to aim. At night, against aircraft popping up for 30 seconds before descending back into ground clutter, visual acquisition was impossible. Gun crews fired at sound, at the general direction of jet noise, at muzzle flashes from other guns shooting at nothing. Thousands of rounds went into the sky over Tripoli. None of them hit F-111s. What actually appeared on radar screens that night? Intermittent contacts, brief tracking solutions, targets that appeared and vanished too quickly for coordinated response. The radar operators reported what they saw. Air Defense Command tried to build a picture from fragmentary data. By the time they understood 6 aircraft were hitting 5 targets, the attack was over. One detail from the post-strike analysis: Libyan radar logs show unidentified contacts over the Mediterranean 90 minutes before the first bomb hit. Faint returns, inconsistent tracks, altitude readings that didn't make sense. Operators logged them as anomalies, probably weather, possibly ships, maybe birds. The contacts were F-111s on approach. Nobody recognized them because nobody expected aircraft at that altitude, that far out, flying profiles that NATO doctrine didn't use in exercises. The SA-6 batteries got the best tracking data: shorter range, lower altitude capability, more realistic engagement parameters. They fired 17 missiles total. 3 actually tracked targets through part of their flight. None achieved intercept. The missiles either lost lock when F-100s and 11s descended or ran out of energy chasing aircraft already over water at full throttle. After-action reports from Libyan Air Defense Command mention unorthodox flight profiles and unexpected approach vectors. That's doctrine speak for "we didn't see them coming and couldn't hit them when we did." The intelligence assessment changed after sunrise. Battle damage assessment photos from satellites showed what happened at each target: destroyed buildings, secondary explosions, fires still burning hours later. The imagery was clean, unambiguous, the kind of evidence that doesn't require interpretation. What made Soviet advisors uncomfortable? The precision. Each target showed strike damage concentrated on specific buildings, not area bombing, not the scatter pattern you get from unguided weapons. The Americans had hit exactly what they aimed at from aircraft that Libyan radars barely detected. A revised assessment went out from Tripoli to Moscow on April 16th. The version that reached Western intelligence through signals intercept is heavily redacted. Whole paragraphs blacked out, technical details removed, conclusions sanitized. What remains shows Soviet analysts trying to explain how an integrated air defense network fired 50-plus missiles and achieved 0 kills. The explanation they settled on: insufficient radar coverage at low altitude. Gaps in the echeloned defense model when attackers didn't conform to expected flight profiles. That's accurate. It's also inadequate. The real problem was doctrinal. Soviet air defense theory assumed attackers would be detectable, trackable, engageable through sequential defense layers. The F-111 mission bypassed the assumption. Files exist in Russian military archives documenting the Libyan air defense performance that night. Probably. Western intelligence tracked document traffic, saw reports moving from Tripoli to Damascus to Moscow, monitored the classification levels. The actual content stayed behind closed access restrictions. Researchers who've requested the files get told they're not available for review. That's different from saying they don't exist. One detail that leaked through signals intelligence: Soviet advisors in Tripoli recommended immediate upgrades to low-altitude radar coverage and increased Shilka positioning around key facilities. The recommendation went nowhere. Libya didn't have the budget. The Soviet Union didn't have the political will to subsidize fixes for a client state that just demonstrated how ineffective their export equipment was. What didn't get transmitted to Moscow, or got transmitted and then disappeared: casualty figures from the Bab al-Azizia strike. The barracks complex housed more than military personnel. Intelligence estimates varied wildly. Some said dozens killed, some said over 100. Libyan government claimed even higher numbers. The actual count never got confirmed. Medical records, if they existed, stayed classified. The facility was rebuilt without public documentation of who died there. Western intelligence tried tracking the paper trail. CIA station reports mention Libyan military personnel requesting transfers away from air defense assignments after April 15th. Syrian advisors visited Tripoli, reviewed the damage, filed reports that also vanished into archives. East German intelligence collected technical data on American weapons performance. They had access through Soviet channels, and that material disappeared behind classification walls that outlasted the country that created them. The assessment concludes with recommendations: improved low-altitude radar systems, better coordination between acquisition and engagement radars, revised doctrine for defending against precision-guided weapons. Standard conclusions after any defensive failure. What's suspicious? None of the follow-up happened. Libya's air defense network in 1987 looked almost identical to the one in 1986. Either the recommendations were ignored, or someone decided the cost of implementing them exceeded the value. Soviet military exports to Libya continued, but the equipment mix didn't change to address the vulnerabilities the F-111 strike exposed. Files exist, recommendations were made, nothing changed. That's the part that makes you wonder who decided not to fix what was clearly broken. One detail from the mission transcripts stands out because it connects to nothing. Weather report at target time noted dust haze limiting visibility to 6 miles. The notation appears in the mission summary, timestamps to 23:47 hours, 7 minutes before first bomb impact. Dust haze over Tripoli in April isn't unusual. Sirocco winds carry Saharan dust north across the Mediterranean coast, reduce visibility, create atmospheric conditions that affect everything from radar performance to optical tracking. Meteorologists predicted it 3 days before the mission. Mission planners accounted for it. 6 miles visibility was more than adequate for infrared targeting systems. What's strange, the detail appears once in the official record, then nowhere else. No crew debriefs mention dust. No weapon system officers reported degraded PAVTAC performance. Battle damage assessment makes no reference to atmospheric conditions affecting targeting accuracy. The notation exists in isolation. I went looking for what dust haze at that concentration does to laser designators. The physics matters. Suspended particles scatter coherent light, reduce the intensity of reflected energy reaching the seeker head, potentially degrade guidance precision. Military specifications for GBU 10 performance include atmospheric conditions. Dust shouldn't have mattered at the concentrations reported, but someone wrote it down. Weather officer at the briefing probably. Standard notation, part of the condition summary that goes into every mission file. It gets logged because that's procedure, not because it's tactically significant. The detail doesn't connect to anything tactical. It doesn't explain why one aircraft went down. That happened over water, nowhere near dust. It doesn't affect the timeline, the weapon's performance, the defensive response. It's just there in the file, a fragment of atmospheric data that someone thought worth recording. 7 years later, a researcher studying precision-guided weapons performance in various conditions requested the full meteorological data from Operation El Dorado Canyon. The Air Force provided sanitized summaries: visibility, wind speed, temperature, cloud cover. Nothing about dust composition, particle density, atmospheric effects on laser propagation. The detailed atmospheric analysis either wasn't done or wasn't released. The dust notation remains. It's in the declassified mission summary, timestamp and all. Nobody's explained why it matters. Nobody's used it to draw conclusions about weapons performance or mission planning. It exists as a data point without context, the kind of detail that makes you think there's more to the story. Then you realize maybe it's just a weather report that someone filed properly and nothing more. I asked about it, called people who might know. Nobody had answers. One retired weapons systems officer said atmospheric conditions get logged automatically, part of the debrief checklist. We probably didn't even notice the dust. The pod worked fine. That's probably accurate. Mission succeeded, weapons hit targets, dust didn't matter. But the detail sits there in the file, specific and isolated, notation without follow-up. It bothers me because I don't know what it means. Maybe it means nothing. Maybe the weather officer was thorough. Maybe dust haze at 23:47 hours is just a fact that got recorded and doesn't connect to anything tactical. The record doesn't explain it, neither does anyone I've asked. The analyst who wrote the Libyan post-strike report worked for the Defense Intelligence Agency. Fluent Arabic, Background in Soviet military doctrine assigned to North African desk work in 1986. Names redacted in the declassified version, but people who worked the section knew who compiled the assessment. The report pulled everything together: signals intercept from the attack, battle damage imagery, Libyan communications afterward, Soviet advisory traffic to Moscow, technical analysis of weapons performance. Comprehensive work. The kind of document that becomes the official record, gets cited in briefings, shapes how command understands what happened. It took 6 weeks to complete. The analyst worked through May 1986, correlating data from multiple intelligence streams, building timeline, assessing Libyan air defense response. The report concluded what everyone already knew. Precision-guided weapons from low altitude bypassed Soviet export defense systems. The Libyans couldn't track what they couldn't see, couldn't hit what they couldn't track. 3 months after submitting the report, the analyst requested reassignment, internal transfer to a different desk, different region, different portfolio. The request went through. By September 1986, someone else was handling North African air defense analysis. That's not unusual. Intelligence analysts rotate. Burnout happens. You spend months dissecting one operation, documenting every detail, living inside the data. Moving on is normal. What's unusual? The analyst refused interview requests for 3 decades. Researchers working on Cold War air campaign histories tried. Journalists covering the anniversary of the Libya strikes tried. Academic historians documenting precision-guided weapons development tried. The answer was always the same. No comment, no interview, not interested in discussing it. Nobody knows why. The report itself is mostly declassified now, available through official channels. Nothing in it suggests classified information that would prevent discussion. The analysis was solid, thorough, professional. The conclusions matched what operational commanders already believed. There's no scandal there, no cover-up, no controversial finding that would explain the silence. One person who worked with the analyst in 1986 said they seemed exhausted after finishing the report. Like they'd spent too much time inside the details, needed distance. That could explain the reassignment. It doesn't explain 30 years of silence. The analyst retired from DIA in 2003, declined a farewell interview with the agency's internal publication, declined contact from former colleagues writing memoirs. When a documentary crew tracked down their address in 2015, trying for on-camera interview about intelligence work during the Cold War, they found a polite note declining participation. The report exists. The work was done. The analyst moved on and stayed moved on. Some people just don't want to revisit what they spent months documenting. Intelligence work means living inside events you weren't part of, reconstructing actions from fragments, building narratives from intercepts and imagery and secondhand reports. Maybe after 6 weeks inside the Libya strike, correlating every missile launch, every radar track, every casualty estimate, you decide you're done with it. The silence might mean something. It might mean nothing. The analyst documented what happened, filed the report, requested new assignment, retired, declined interviews. That's the full story as far as anyone knows. The report sits in the archives. The analyst's name is redacted but known to people who worked the section. The work speaks for itself. The silence after doesn't change what the work documented.